Chapter 1: The Empty Canyon. Dawn came gray and cold to the high desert, and Caleb Ward rode the north fence line the way he had ridden it every morning for 11 years, slow, unhurried, his eyes moving over each post and wire the way another man might read scripture. He was a lean man past 35, weathered to the color of saddle leather, with a jaw that had forgotten how to soften and hands that had grown honest with work. He spoke to no one out here, and there was no one to speak to. That suited him. A man who kept his own counsel could not be argued out of his word, and Caleb Ward's word, once given, was the nearest thing to law he owned. He stopped where a post leaned and stepped down to reset it, working the shovel in the frozen crust, and while he worked he did not think of Sarah. He had trained himself not to. 11 years was long enough that the grief had gone quiet, settling into him the way water settles into stone, not gone, only patient. Still, some mornings the light came slanting over the ridge just so, gold on the frost, and his chest would tighten before he could stop it. This was one of those mornings. He set the post, tamped the dirt, and swung back into the saddle without looking at the sunrise again. It was the buzzards that turned him from his own land. They wheeled in a slow black spiral above the far ridge, a dozen of them and more, patient as undertakers. Caleb sat his horse and watched them a long moment. Then the wind shifted, and he caught the smell riding under it, smoke gone cold, and beneath the smoke something worse, something that made the gelding toss its head and sidestep. He gentled the horse with a hand on its neck and turned it toward the ridge. He did not want to go. Every year of hard living told him to ride the other way. But a man who would not look at a thing was a coward, and Caleb had never yet allowed himself that. The side canyon opened below the ridge like a wound. There had been a rancheria there. He had known it in a distant way, the way a man knows his neighbor's fires burn across the valley without ever sharing their bread. Apache families, a cluster of brush shelters and cook fires and children's voices carried thin on the wind of a summer evening. Now the shelters were burned to black ribs. The cook fires were ash scattered gray across the ground. He rode down slow, hat pushed back, and made himself see it all. Sickness had come first. He could read that much. The way some of the dead lay wrapped and tended, laid out with care by hands that had loved them, their faces covered, small bundles set at their sides by people who had grieved properly before the grieving grew too large to keep pace with. That was a coughing sickness, the kind that swept through close quarters in a hard winter and did not care whose child it took. And then something else had come after, when the canyon was already emptied and weak, men on horses who found a people too sick to run and did not trouble to spare them for it. He saw the sign of both and did not look at the shapes any longer than he had to. There were old and young among them alike. He was not a man who wept easily, but his throat worked, and he took his hat off and held it against his chest and sat there in the ruin with the buzzards complaining overhead. And he thought that whatever else these had been, they had been somebody's, loved and named, and no man ought to ride past that with his hat still on. Lord, he said, and found he had nothing to put after it. The word hung alone in the cold air. He walked the gelding through it, and that was when he saw the other sign, and his eyes narrowed. Cavalry had been here, the shod tracks of army mounts, the print of an issue boot heavy in the ash. And with them, apart from them, a stranger's tracks, fine boots, narrow, a town man's boots, walking careful among the dead the way a man walks who is counting something. Not burying, counting. Caleb crouched over the print a long while, and something cold that had nothing to do with the morning settled into him. Someone had already been here, upright and unhurried, taking measure of the dead for a purpose of his own. He almost missed the sound. It was small, so small he took it first for the wind worrying at a scrap of hide. Then it came again, and it was not the wind. It came from the dry wash that cut along the canyon's edge, a thread of sound quickly swallowed, the sound a creature makes when it has learned that sound brings harm. Caleb went still. Then he swung down, slow, and looped the reins over a burned stub and walked toward the wash with his hands loose and empty at his sides. He looked down into it and found a child. She was small, 6 years old, he guessed, maybe less. It was hard to say for the thinness of her. An Apache girl, jammed back under the cutbank where the flood had scooped a hollow, her knees drawn up under her chin and her black eyes enormous in a face gone sharp with hunger. She did not cry out when she saw him. She did not move at all, only watched him the way a cornered fox watches, every muscle wound to bolt, and in her 2 arms she clutched a small carved horse of pale wood, holding it against her chest as though it were the last solid thing in the world. Caleb Ward had gentled 1,000 frightened things in his life. He knew better than to reach. He lowered himself down instead, easy, until he was sitting in the cold sand of the wash an arm's length from her and no nearer, his forearms across his knees, his hat pushed back so she could see his face. He looked not at her but out across the wash, giving her his eyes to study without the weight of his looking back. And he began to talk, low and slow, the way he talked to a colt that had never known a rope. "Easy now," he said, "easy. I'm not going to touch you. You just sit there and I'll sit here, and there's no hurry on either of us." He drew the canteen from his hip, unscrewed it without a sudden motion, and set it in the sand halfway between them. "Water, you want it, it's yours." He worked a strip of jerky loose from his coat and laid it beside the canteen. "That too." She did not move. "I had a wife once," Caleb said to the far bank, because talking gentled him as much as it gentled her. "She'd have known what to say to you, had a way of quieting a body just by being in the room. I never did have the knack for words myself." He was quiet a while. The buzzards turned overhead. "You're all right. Nobody's coming down into that wash after you, you hear." "Not while I'm sitting here." He nodded slow toward the little horse clamped against her chest. "You hold on to that. That's yours. Whoever carved it for you cared a good deal about you to make it so fine. Nobody's taking it, and nobody's taking you." The morning wore on, and the sun climbed and warmed the wash, and Caleb Ward sat and talked his slow talk to a child who would not come. Twice her eyes went to the canteen. Once her cracked lips parted. But she did not move toward it while he watched, and so at last he rose easy and stepped back and let her have the space. He drank from his own canteen where she could see him do it, so she would know the water was safe, and he set it down again and walked to his horse and did not look back. When he did look from the saddle, the canteen lay tipped on its side and the jerky was gone. He did not press her. He knew what pressing did. He rode a little way up the canyon and made a small business of nothing, checking the gelding's shoe, coiling a rope, and let the day slide toward dusk. And when the light went long and amber and the cold came creeping back down the walls, he saw her come up out of the wash at last, a small ragged shape moving through the ruin, the wooden horse still clutched in one arm, following him at a distance he was careful never to close. He rode slow, slower than a man rides, slower than the gelding liked, so that it fretted and mouthed the bit, and he had to hold it down to a walk with a steady hand. He left a strip of jerky on a flat rock and rode on, and behind him, when he had gone far enough to be no threat, he heard the small, quick scuff of her feet coming to take it, and then falling back to her careful distance. He left another farther on, and another beyond that, marking the miles between the canyon and his gate with small mercies. Twice he heard her stumble in the dark, and each time his hand tightened on the reins, and each time he made himself keep facing forward, for he understood that his turning would frighten her worse than the falling. The sun went down red behind the ridge, and the first stars came out hard and white, and all the long way home Caleb Ward rode at the pace of a starving child's steps, never turning, never hurrying, leaving a thin trail of food and low words behind him in the dark like a man laying a line of trust across the desert one knot at a time. His gate stood pale in the starlight when they reached it. He stepped down and swung it open and stood aside, and the girl stopped 10 feet off, swaying with weariness, watching him with those great dark eyes. Caleb crouched down on his heels to make himself small, and he held out one open hand, palm up, and said nothing at all. For a long moment, nothing in the world moved but the wind. Then she came. She crossed the last of the distance on her thin legs and stopped before him, and slowly, so slowly he hardly dared breathe, she reached out and slipped her small, cold hand into his rough one. Her fingers closed. The wooden horse pressed between their palms. And Caleb Ward, who had not let himself feel much of anything in 11 years, felt something turn over hard in his chest and stay turned. He thought of the fine, narrow boot print among the dead, someone counting, someone who would come upright and unhurried with a purpose of his own. "No," he said low under his breath, so quiet it was near a prayer and near a threat both. His hand closed warm around her small one. "No, I've buried about all I aim to. Whatever's coming for you, girl, it comes through me first." She did not understand the words, but she must have understood the man, for she did not pull away, and together they went in through the gate, and Caleb Ward drew it shut behind them against the dark. Chapter 2, Learning Her Name. Late summer was letting go of the country an inch at a time. The cottonwoods along the wash had begun to yellow at their crowns, and the light came slantwise now in the mornings, gold and thin, laying long shadows off the fence posts before the heat could burn them away. Cade had ranched this stretch of high desert alone the better part of 9 years, and he knew the turning of the season the way he knew the ache in his shoulder before rain. What he did not know What he learned fresh every hour of every day was how a house sounded with a child in it. She woke before he did. He would come down the loft ladder in the gray dark and find her already sitting up in the small bed he had built her, knees drawn to her chest, the carved wooden horse held loose in one hand, watching the door as if it might open on something worse than morning. 2 weeks in his house, and she still slept like a thing that expected to run. "Mornin'," he said, the same as he said it every day, low and even the way a man gentles a colt. "You hungry?" She did not answer. She never answered with words, but her dark eyes tracked him to the stove, and that was answer enough. The first breakfast he had made her, he had burned black. He was no bad hand at a skillet, but that morning he had been so busy watching her from the corner of his eye, making sure she did not bolt, that he let the salt pork go to charcoal and filled the whole cabin with smoke. She had flinched at the gray haze rolling to the rafters, and he had understood in a cold rush what smoke meant to her now, what it would always mean, and he had thrown the door and both shutters wide and stood in the yard with the pan in his hand, cursing himself quiet. He was more careful now. This morning he set the pork gentle in the pan and turned it before it browned too far and laid 2 eggs beside it, and when he set the plate down she ate with both hands, fast and low over the food, the way she always did. He did not tell her to slow down. A body that had gone hungry, as long as hers had, did not need a man's opinion on the matter. After he tried her hair, that was the hardest of it. He had watched long ago how women did the thing, the parting, the plaiting, 3 strands crossed over and over. It looked simple as splicing rope. It was not. His hands were made for cinch and latigo and the rough work of the range, and her hair was fine and slippery as creek water, and every braid he managed came out lumped and crooked and half undone by noon. "Hold still now," he murmured, kneeling behind her on the plank floor, tongue caught in his teeth. "I know it ain't right. My fingers are all thumbs, that's the truth of it." She sat patient under his clumsy hands, and once he felt it more than saw it, she reached up and moved his fingers, showing him where the strand had slipped. He went still. "That where it goes?" he asked. "There." She let his hand go. He tried again, followed where she had put him, and the braid held a little truer than before. "Well," he said, and something warmed low in his chest that he had no name for. "Look at us." The days folded one into another, and she was folded into them. She followed him to the barn while he milked and stood at the stall rail watching the mare with a still, deep attention. She trailed him to the woodpile and, unasked, began carrying the split pieces to the box by the door. When he mended the corral, she squatted in the dust an arm's length off and watched every turn of the wire. And when he glanced at her, she looked back steady, no longer feral, only careful, a child measuring the world to see whether it would hold. The words came slow, and they came from both directions. It started with the horse, hers, the little carved one, worn smooth at the withers from her thumb. He pointed at it one evening across the supper table. "Horse," he said. She looked at the toy, then at him. "Horse," he said again, and pointed out the window at the mare in the corral, gray in the dusk. "Horse." Something moved behind her eyes. She lifted the carved thing an inch off the table and said, careful, testing the shape of it, "Horse." He grinned so wide it near cracked his weathered face. "That's it, that's the whole of it, horse." She said a word back to him then, her own word, soft and rolling, and touched the toy again. He tried to say it after her and made a poor botch of it, and this was the thing he would remember. The corner of her mouth twitched. Not a smile, not yet, but near cousin to one. So it went evening on evening. She gave him water, fire, dog, star, hand, each in her tongue, and he gave them back in his. And half of them he mangled so badly she had to say them twice, slow, like he was the child. He did not mind being the child. He would have played the fool from dawn to dark to keep that near smile coming. He carved her a second horse in the evenings by lamplight out of a scrap of cottonwood. It took him the better part of a week, for he was no whittler and kept shaving down what he'd botched. When it was done, it was rougher than hers, blunter in the legs, but it was plainly a horse and plainly meant to stand beside the one she had. He set it on the table by her plate without a word. She looked at it a long while. Then she took her own horse and stood the two of them together, nose to nose, and looked up at him, and this time it was a smile, whole and sudden and bright as a struck match, and it hit him somewhere he had thought long since scarred shut. "There she is," he said rough. "There's the girl." It was her name that undid him in the end. She told it to him on a cool evening at the door, the 2 carved horses standing on the sill between them. She touched her own chest and said it, 3 syllables, rising and falling like water over stones. He tried it. He got it wrong. She said it again, patient, and touched her chest, and he tried again and got it wrong a second way, the sound sliding out from under his tongue. He must have tried it a dozen times. She corrected him each time without impatience, shaping her own mouth slow so he could see, and he watched her lips and tried once more, and the word came out of him whole and right. She went still. Then she nodded once, grave as a judge, and smiled that struck-match smile again, and it was a reward, plain as coin, for a thing well done. "That's you," he said quietly. "That's your name." He said it once more, just to have the feel of it, and she let him, and the dusk came down soft and blue around the cabin, and for a moment there was no raid and no smoke and no empty canyon in the world. Only a man and a child, and a name passed between them like something handed carefully across a fire. He had to go to town for flour and coffee and cartridges, and he took her because he would not leave her. He sat her on the wagon seat beside him with her carved horse in her lap and drove the long, dusty miles in, and the town went quiet as they came down the street. Not silent. Worse than silent. It went to muttering. Men on the walk in front of the saloon turned to look. A woman drew her skirts as if the wagon carried sickness, and somebody said a word. Cade heard it clear. A low, ugly word for what the girl was, and he felt her go small and still at his side. He pulled the wagon up hard in front of the store. Then he lifted her down himself, both hands around her, set her on her feet, and walked her inside with his hand on her thin shoulder and his eyes level at any man fool enough to hold them. Mrs. Hollies was behind the counter, gray-haired and square, and she did not so much as blink. "Cade," she said, "and who's this?" "She's mine to look after," he said. "For now." Mrs. Hollies came around the counter, knelt down slow to the girl's height, and did not reach for her. "That's a fine horse you've got there," she said gently. The girl looked at her, then at Cade, then held the carved thing up an inch, the whole of a trust she did not give lightly. Mrs. Hollies smiled. "Finest I've seen." She got Cade his flour and his coffee, and while she wrapped it, she talked low. "You want to watch yourself," she said. "Tongues are wagging already. Some folks don't hold with it, a white man raising an Apache child." She glanced at the girl, softened. "There was a fellow in here 2 days back, too, city clothes, gray suit, wanting to know were there orphaned Indian children hereabouts, and did I know of any being kept and who by. Said he places such children, said there's money paid on it, government money. I didn't tell him nothing, but somebody will." Cade set a coin on the counter and left his change. "Obliged," he said quietly. The marshal caught him at the wagon, a lean, fair man named Doan who had never given Cade trouble. He tipped his hat to the girl first, which Cade marked. "Heard you took in the little one from the canyon," Doan said. "That's a Christian thing." He rubbed the back of his neck, looked off down the street. "I'll tell you straight, 'cause I'd want it told to me. The law on this is murky as a spring creek. There's folks in this territory got ideas about where Indian children belong, and it ain't on a white man's ranch. Papers can be drawn. Agents can come. I'm saying folks are watching, and I'm the one they'll come to when they've made up their minds." He met Cade's eye. "Keep your nose clean. Give 'em nothing to point at." "She's et regular for the first time in her life," Cade said. "She sleeps in a bed I built. You tell me what there is to point at in that." Doan held up a hand, not unkind. "I'm on your side of it, near as I can be. Just mind yourself." He touched his hat again and went. The ride home was long and dark by the last of it. The stars came out thick and cold over the mesas, and the wagon creaked, and the mule's hooves fell soft in the dust, and somewhere out in the sage a coyote called and got no answer. The girl fell asleep before they reached the wash. She listed sideways slow with the sway of the wagon and came to rest against his arm, the carved horse still clutched in both her hands, her breath gone deep, and even the way it never was in her own bed. He looked down at her a long moment in the starlight, the crooked braid he had made her, the small trusting weight of her against his side. He shifted the reins to one hand, drew his coat off his own shoulder and tucked it close around her against the night chill, and did not care that it left him cold. "Let 'em watch," he said softly to the dark, to no one. "Let 'em bring their papers." He clucked the mule toward home, and the stars wheeled slow overhead, and the child slept warm against the only wall between her and the world. Chapter 3, A Man's Word. The morning the frost first came, Elia's crane led the gentle bay mare out into the yard and lifted the child up onto her back before the sun had cleared the ridge. Nita sat there stiff as a fence post, both small hands knotted in the mare's mane, her dark eyes wide enough to swallow the whole world. "Easy now," Elia said. "She won't drop you. She's carried heavier fools than you and never spilled a one." The girl said nothing. She had a way of going quiet and watchful when a thing frightened her, and he had learned not to crowd her out of it. He kept one hand flat against the mare's shoulder and the other loose on the lead, and he walked them slow, a wide, easy circle around the water trough. "You feel that?" he asked. "That roll under you, that's her walking. All you got to do is go along with it, like a boat on water." She had never seen a boat, and he knew it, but the words came out of him anyway, low and steady, the way a man talks to a spooked animal or a scared thing that is not an animal at all. By the third circle, her shoulders had come down from around her ears. By the sixth, she let go of the mane with one hand. By the 10th, she was smiling, that quick, careful smile she gave out like it cost her something, and maybe it did. "There she is," Elias murmured. He stopped the mare and looked up at her. "Now, she needs a name. Can't go on calling her the Bay. What do you want to call her?" Nita studied the horse a long moment. Then she leaned forward, pressed her cheek down against the course mane, and said a word in her own tongue, soft, round, 3 syllables that rose and fell like water over stone. "That's so," Elia said. "And what's that mean?" The girl thought. She was still learning his words the way he was still learning hers, a slow trade, one for one, across the supper table each night. She held up her hand and made a slow drifting motion, fingers rippling downward. "Rain," Elias guessed. "You want to call her Rain." Nita nodded, pleased, and patted the mare's neck as if sealing a bargain. "Rain it is." He looked over at the 2 geldings dozing in the corral. "And them." She named them too, quick now that the game was hers, one a word that made her puff out her cheeks, which he took to mean the fat one, and the other something sharp and short that turned out, after much pointing and laughing, to mean the horse that had stepped on his boot the week before. She remembered that. She remembered everything. He had never in his life met a creature who missed so little. They rode the flat below the house until the frost burned off, him leading her up top with her spine straightening by the minute. And once, just once, she laughed out loud, a bright, ragged sound like it had been shut up in her a long while and only now found the door. It went straight through him, that sound. He had to turn his face away and pretend to study the ridgeline so she would not see what it did to him. The nightmare came that same night. He woke to it before he understood what had woken him, a thin, high keening from the loft, words in her tongue tumbling over each other, fast and terrified. He was up the ladder before he had his wits about him. She was sitting bolt upright in the little bed he had built her, the carved wooden horse clutched to her chest, her whole body shaking. Her eyes were open, but she wasn't seeing him. She was somewhere else. She was back in the canyon. "Nita," he kept his voice down low the way he had that first day in the wash. "Nita, it's Elias, you're home. You're up in the loft, and there's a roof over you, and it's just the wind." She flinched from his hand, and he stilled it, palm out, and waited. "I'm right here," he said. "I ain't going anywhere. You take your time." It took a long while. He sat down on the floorboards beside the little bed, his back against the wall, and he did not touch her, and he did not leave. He talked, low and even, about nothing at all, the mare, the frost, the fence he meant to mend come morning, and slowly the shaking eased and her eyes came back from wherever they had gone and found him there in the dark. She looked at him a long time. Then she crept out from under the blanket, wooden horse and all, and settled herself against his side, her head just under his arm, and let out a breath that seemed too big for so small a body. "That's it," he said. "That's it, I got you." She said a word then, quiet, half asleep already, her cheek against his ribs. One word, and it was not any word she had traded him across the supper table, and he did not know its meaning, only that it was said the way a child says a thing that is bone-deep and certain, and that it went into him and lodged there and undid something he had kept knotted shut for a good many years. He sat the whole night through and did not move for fear of waking her, and when the gray came up in the window he was still there, and so was she, and the wooden horse had fallen between them, and he thought that if the Lord had a plan in emptying that canyon he could not fathom it, but he would spend what was left of him being grateful for the one small thing that had crawled out of it alive. The man came 3 days after, riding a livery horse and wearing a town suit that had never seen an honest day's dust. Elias watched him come up the wagon track from the porch, and something in him went cold and quiet the way it did before weather. He set the girl inside with a firmness that made her look up at him, and he told her to stay by the stove, and he stepped down into the yard to meet the stranger where he could keep him. "Mr. Crane," the man swung down, smiling, and put out a soft hand. "Prout, I'm with the Indian Bureau agent for the district. I do apologize for riding out unannounced." Elias did not take the hand. After a moment, Prout withdrew it, unruffled, and tucked it into his waistcoat. "You've come a long way for a social call," Elias said. "Not social, no." Prout's smile did not move. "It's come to my attention that you're keeping a native child out here, Apache, orphaned in that unpleasantness up the canyon this summer." He shook his head, all sorrow. "A terrible business. But it does raise a question of jurisdiction, you understand. Children of the tribes are wards of the government, Mr. Crane. There's a process. There are papers. There are proper placements, schools back east, good Christian homes, where a child like that can be brought up right. She's brought up fine where she is." "I'm sure you mean well." Prout's voice dropped into something confidential, almost kind. "But a lone man, no wife, no standing, it isn't fitting, sir. And I'll be frank with you, there's provision in it. The Bureau compensates for the trouble of placement. A man could see himself made whole for his charity and clear his hands of a burden besides. Everybody comes out ahead." Elias looked at him for a long moment. "You're telling me," he said slowly, "you'll pay me to hand her over." "I'm telling you the arrangement is generous." "No." The word dropped into the yard flat and final, and for the first time the smile faltered at its edges. "Mr. Crane." "You didn't hear me, no. She's under my roof, she's under my hand. I gave my word to that child, and my word is the only law I answer to out here." Elias took a step, and something in the way he moved made the agent shift his weight back toward his horse. "You've said your piece. Now you can climb up on that hired horse and ride back the way you came." Prout gathered himself. The kindness went out of his face like water out of a cracked jug, and what was left was smooth and hard. "You want to be careful, friend," he said. "You truly do. There's a bounty standing over that raid, over the ones that walked away from it. And folks in town are already asking how a solitary rancher come by an Apache girl all his own. A man might ask himself how that looks. A man might ask himself what a bounty rider would make of it, or a jury." He gathered his reins. "The law's a slow thing, Mr. Crane, but it's a patient thing, and it always comes round. I'd think hard, was I you, about which side of it you'd care to be standing on." "I've done my thinking," Elias said. "Get off my land." The agent mounted, touched his hat with a mockery of courtesy, and rode. Elias stood in the cold yard and watched him the whole way down the track until the ridge took him, and only then did he let his shoulders come down. When he turned, Nita was in the doorway. He did not know how long she had been there. She had a way of moving without sound, and she had heard enough tones in her short life to read a man without a single word of his tongue. He saw that plain in her face. She had understood none of it and all of it. She crossed the yard to him on her bare feet over the frost-hard ground, and she took his hand, and into his rough palm she pressed the carved wooden horse. The one thing she had carried out of the fire, the one thing that was wholly and only hers, and she folded his fingers shut over it and looked up at him. He understood. She was giving him the thing she loved most so that he would not go. So that whatever was coming, it would find them tied together and could not pull one loose from the other. His throat closed up on him. He went down on one knee in the cold, so his eyes were level with hers, and he pressed the little horse back into her two hands and held them there in both of his. "You keep that," he said, rough. "You hold on to it. And you hear me now, nobody is taking you anywhere. Not that man, not any man, not while I've got breath. That's a promise, and I don't break those. You understand me." She could not have understood the half of the words, but she understood him. She nodded, solemn and certain, and she did not let go of his hands, and he did not let go of hers. That evening he rode the fence line at dusk, the way he did when a thing was working in him and would not settle. The frost had held all day, and the ground rang under the gelding's hooves. Away to the west, the sky had gone the color of a bruise, purple and yellow at once, and a great slow tower of cloud was building up over the far mountains, lightning walking in its belly too distant to hear. He sat the horse a long while and watched it come. There would be papers, and there would be a bounty, and there would be men who thought a child was a thing that money could move from one hand to another. Let them come. He turned the gelding for home, where the one lamp burned yellow in the window and the small one was waiting, and he set his jaw against the coming weather, both kinds, and rode down to meet it. Chapter 4, The Rider from the West. The talk in town had a shape now, and Cole did not like the shape of it. He heard it first at the freight dock, where two men fell quiet as he passed, then not quiet enough. He heard it plainly from the storekeeper's wife, who came around her counter, set both hands flat upon it, and lowered her voice the way a person does when the wrong ear might be listening. "There's a man been asking after survivors," she said. "Of the canyon, the sickness, the raid, all of it, a cold sort. Says he rides for the reward that got posted after." "What's he look like?" "Lean, gray duster, doesn't drink, doesn't sit. Asked Holly's at the stable had anyone seen an Apache child taken in by a white man hereabouts." She held his eyes. "Holly's said no, but Holly's has a loose mouth when he's paid, Mr. Cole, and that agent's been free with his money." Cole set a coin on the counter for the flour and did not pick up his change. "Obliged to you," he said. "Take her the blue cloth," the woman said, softer still, and pressed a folded length of it into his sack without charge. "For the winter coming, and watch the road behind you going home." He watched the road. He saw no gray duster, only the long light laying gold across the sage. But the knowledge rode with him all the miles home the way a stone rides in a boot, small and constant. And by the time he crested the last rise above his own ranch, the sun was near down, and something was wrong with the shape of the ridge. There was a rider on it. Cole reined the wagon horse and sat still. Against the burning sky the shape held motionless, a single horse, a single rider, high on the north ridge that looked down over his house and his corral and the smoke standing up from his chimney where Nady would be waiting. The rider did not move, had not moved, Cole understood with a slow, cold certainty for a long while, long enough to count his stock, long enough to learn the door he used and the window that showed a child's lamp. He did not hurry the wagon. He brought it down the track at the same pace he always did, and only when he was inside with the bar dropped did he let the breath out of him. Nady ran to his legs, and he put his hand on her dark head and felt her small weight against him and thought, "Not you, not ever again from me." "Someone came?" she asked. Her English had grown careful and true over the season. "Just a rider on the hill," he said. "Passing through, you eat." He gave her the blue cloth and watched her face open over it, and he cleaned his rifle in the light of the fire, unhurried. And he did not tell her that when he had looked up the second time the rider was gone from the ridge, which frightened him more than the sitting had. The rider came at dawn. Cole was at the corral when he felt it, that prickle a man gets who has lived alone long enough to trust his own skin, and he turned, and she was already halfway across his yard. On foot now, the horse ground-tied behind her, a woman come out of the west with the sun still low at her back so that she walked up out of her own long shadow. She was Apache. Travel had used her hard, her clothes were sun-faded, her face gaunt at the cheek, but she came on straight-backed and unafraid with a knife at her belt, and her eyes going over everything, the corral, the house, the man, measuring, hunting. Grief had burned her down to something with no soft edges left. Cole knew grief when he saw it worn on a person. He wore some himself. His rifle leaned against the rail an arm's length off. He did not reach for it. He straightened slow and let his hands hang open where she could see them. "You've been up on my ridge," he said. She stopped 10 feet from him. When she spoke her English was accented but clear, each word set down hard like a coin slapped on wood. "A child lives in that house." It was not a question. An Apache child, small, a girl. Cole said nothing. In that nothing she read everything, and something moved across her face that was terrible to watch. Hope so long starved it looked like rage. "How does a white man come by an Apache child?" she said, and her voice went low and even. "Unless he took her, or bought her. There are men who buy them now. I have followed the trade of them for 1 year. Her hand had not gone to the knife. It did not need to. The whole of her was the knife. "Which are you?" "Neither," Cole said. "You will say that?" "I'll say it because it's true. I found her in the wash below your canyon with the buzzards already down. There was no living soul for a day's ride but her. She'd have died in another 2. He held the woman's eyes. "I didn't take her from anybody. There wasn't anybody left to take her from. You'd know that better than me. You were there after. I saw the boot sign. Somebody walked through those dead counting them." "That was me." The words came out of her cracked. "I counted them. I counted everyone, and I did not find her among them, and I told myself—" She stopped. Her jaw worked. "I told myself a coyote had carried the small bones off. For 1 year I have told myself that. It was easier than the other thing." "What other thing?" That someone living had her? Her voice dropped to almost nothing, and I could not find where. They stood in the cold new light with 10 feet of trampled dirt between them, and neither reached for iron, and Cole understood they were both afraid of the same thing from opposite ends of it. That the child inside would be taken away over the sill of that door and be gone into a country too big to search. I won't let her go by force, Cole said quietly. I want that plain between us. I've raised her a season. I braid her hair badly, and I burned her every breakfast till July, and she calls the sorrel mare a name I can't say right. She's under my roof and my word. Blood or no blood, you don't take her off this place at knife point. And I, the woman said, and now at last her voice shook, will not leave this valley without seeing her face. If you have to shoot me for that white man, then. The door banged. Nadie stood on the step in her shift with the blue cloth still clutched from the night, and for one heartbeat she only stared, and then a sound came out of the child that Cole had never heard her make, high and broken and old, a word in her own tongue flung across the yard like a hand thrown out over water. The woman turned. Whatever had held her upright, a full year went out of her all at once. She dropped to her knees in the dirt of a stranger's yard, and Nadie was already running the way the child never ran, and struck her aunt's chest, and the woman folded around her and made no sound at all, which was worse than any sound. Her whole body curved over the little one like something sheltering a coal from the wind. The child was talking, fast, drowning, the same word over and over, and the woman was rocking her and pressing her mouth to the black hair and rocking her. And the sun came up over the both of them, and Cole took his hat off and turned half away to give them what a man could give, which was only his back and his not watching. He heard behind him the child say his name. And he heard her say another word beside it, the father word she had given him in the dark of a bad night, and he heard the woman go still. When he turned back, the aunt was looking at him over the child's head, and her face had changed. Not softened, she was not a soft woman, and this was not a soft world, but opened, the way a fist opens when it has been closed so long it has forgotten it can. She said something to Nadie in their tongue, low, and the girl answered, pointing at him, at the corral, at the loft window where her small bed was, talking, telling a whole season in a rush. She says you did not hurt her, the woman said at last. It cost her. No. She says you carved her a horse to match the one her mother made. Her voice caught on the word mother. That true? The woman looked down at the child a long moment. Then she rose, and she did not sheath a knife because she had never drawn one, and she stood in his yard as a person stands who has decided something. I will stay, she said. There, at the edge. I will not sleep under your roof, and I will not put down my knife, and if you are lying to me, I will know it, and there will be an account between us. But I will not go from where she is, not for you, not for any law of your people. I have already lost her once by leaving. Cole looked at the child holding to the woman's leg with both hands, at the face that was more whole in that hour than he had made it in a season of trying, and he felt the truth of it land in him like a stone dropped into a deep and quiet well. Some things a man cannot give a child no matter how well he loves her. Her own blood was one. There's a good spot by the cottonwood, he said. Water's close, I'll bring you a lamp when it's dark. She inclined her head, not thanks, but acknowledgement, which between them meant more. That evening, when the light went long and red again, Cole saw her out by the cottonwood alone. She had cleared a small place on the ground, and she knelt over it, and she had loosed her hair, and she was moving her hands in a way that was not for him to understand, and her voice went up and down in a song with no floor to it, a keening that was also a thanks mourning her sister at last over living proof the sister's child had come through. Nadie stood beside her, small and solemn, doing what her aunt did. Cole stood back by the corral rail with his hat in his hand and his head bowed, and he did not go closer, and he did not speak, and he let the woman grieve her dead in her own way, because it was hers to do and his only to honor. When it was full dark, he carried the lamp out and set it near her without a word and walked back. 2 fires burned that night on the ranch that had known one man's single fire for years, his in the house, hers under the cottonwood, and the child asleep somewhere between the 2 of them, claimed twice over. He lay awake a long time. He knew, and he understood the woman knew it too, though neither had said it, that the rider on the ridge would not be the last to come up out of the west looking for the last child of that canyon. The agent had loosed his questions. A cold man in a gray duster was counting survivors for a reward, and there were now 2 people on this ground who would die before they let the little one be taken. two people who did not yet trust each other at all. Out by the cottonwood, the lamp burned low and steady, and did not go out. Chapter 5, Two Guardians, One Child. The cough had followed Nolly out of summer and into the first cool mornings, a small, dry sound that woke Eli Cade before the birds and left him lying stiff in the dark, listening. He had tried honey in warm water, steam from a kettle under a blanket. Nothing had loosened it, and he had lain awake more nights than he would admit, imagining the sickness that had emptied the canyon, reaching one long finger back to take the last of it. So when he came up from the barn that morning and found the Apache woman crouched at the edge of the yard, he did not send her off. Sella had slept 3 nights now at the rim of his land, near enough to watch, far enough to keep her pride. She had refused the loft, refused the house, refused everything but a place by the cottonwoods where she could see both the girl and the road. This morning she was on her heels in the wash below the corral, digging with a flat stone, and beside her lay pale roots and a fan of gray-green leaves he did not know. "That cough," she said without looking up. Her English was careful, each word set down like a stone across a creek. "I hear it in the night. From here I hear it. I've tried near everything. You have tried white things." She rose, brushing the earth from her hands, and there was no scorn in it, only fact. "This land raised her people before it raised you. It knows her." He might have bristled at that a week ago. He only stepped back and let her pass. In the kitchen she worked without asking where anything was, which told him she had watched the house longer than he'd guessed. She bruised the leaves between her palms, dropped them in the kettle with the roots, and set it to a slow boil while Nolly watched her aunt with the wide, drinking eyes of a child who had waited a year to see a face she knew. Sella talked to her low in their tongue the whole time, and the girl answered in small pieces, and twice she laughed, a sound Eli had heard maybe a dozen times since he'd found her, and never yet in front of anyone but him. The brew came out bitter and green-smelling. Nolly made a face and drank it because her aunt held the cup and would not let her stop. "Twice a day," Sella said. 3 days. The cough will go down into the ground where it belongs." By evening the sound in the girl's chest had already gone softer. Eli heard it and said nothing, but he took his hat off to the woman in his mind, and later found himself out at the corral with his tools. She had looked at that corral more than once. He'd caught it, the way her eye traveled the sagging rail, the post that had heaved half out of the ground 2 winters back. A woman raised to horses would notice. So he dug the post fresh, tamped it plumb, and hung a new rail straight, sweating in the low gold light while Nolly sat on the top bar and named the horses for her aunt. When he finished, he found Sella standing at the gate with her arms folded, studying his work the way he'd studied her medicine. "It was crooked," she said. "It was. Now it is not. No." She gave a short nod, the barest thing, but he understood it for what it was. They were 2 people taking each other's measure the only honest way either of them knew, by what their hands could do. They ate supper on the porch because the house felt too small for the 3 of them, and the thing they were still deciding. He'd shot a young jackrabbit, and Sella had done something to it with wild onion and a plant she named by a word he couldn't hold, and it was better than anything he'd cooked all season. Nolly sat between them on a crate, swinging her feet. "You will tell me," Sella said at last, "how you found her." He turned his cup in his hands. He was not a man who talked, and this was the hardest telling he had, but he owed her the whole of it. "Buzzards first," he said, "then the smoke. I came up the side canyon and there wasn't anybody left to help. I looked, I want you to know I looked." His jaw worked. "I was fixing to ride out when I heard her, down in the dry wash, wouldn't come to me for near a day, just watched, had that little wood horse gripped so tight her knuckles were white." Sella's face had gone very still. When she spoke her voice had thinned. "My sister carved that horse for her the winter before. I figured it was somebody's." She looked out at the darkening land a long moment. Then she gave it back to him, her own share of the truth, and it cost her plainly. "I was away," she said, "trading north 3 days' ride when the sickness came into the canyon. When I came back," her hand made a small, flat motion, a wing folding. "There was nothing. Ash and the sick and the ones, the soldiers and the raiders left. I looked among the dead for her small face, and I did not find it, and I told myself that was mercy. I told myself she was carried off, gone east, sold, and then I told myself she was under the ground where I could not see. For a year I have ridden between those 2 things." Her eyes came to the girl, and the fierceness in them broke into something Eli looked away from to leave her the privacy of it. I did not let myself think she was alive and kept. I could not carry that and still ride. She's alive, Eli said gently. She's fed and she's warm and she's near got her cough beat. Yes, Sella wiped the flat of her thumb once beneath her eye and let no more than that fall. Because of you. A white man who kept a canyon child when it would have been easier to leave her. She said it as a debt named aloud. I did not believe such a man was made. Neither did the town, he said, and to his own surprise she laughed, a real laugh, low and rough, and it undid something in the air between them. Nolly looked up at the sound, delighted, and laughed too because they were laughing, and for a moment the three of them were only a family at supper, and nothing was coming for them at all. Later, when the girl's eyes had gone heavy, they carried her, he did, and Sella walked beside, up the loft ladder to the small bed he'd built. Nolly's hair had come loose from the braid he'd worked into it that morning, the braid that was, he knew, still clumsy no matter how he practiced. Sella reached to smooth it back, and his hand was already there for the same reason, and their fingers met against the child's dark hair. Neither pulled away at once. He felt the roughness of her palm, the small heat of it, and he looked up and she was already looking at him, and for the length of a held breath there was a thing between them with no name he was willing to give it. Then she drew her hand back and busied it with the blanket, and he went down the ladder and did not trust his own face, and told himself he was a fool of a man near 40 to feel the ground move under a woman's hand. It might have gone on like that, the slow, careful building of it, if the boy hadn't come up the road the next afternoon on the storekeeper's mule. He was maybe 12, and he handed down a folded square of paper without dismounting, said, "Mrs. Harlow says you're to read it straight away," and turned the mule and was gone before Eli had the fold open. The storekeeper's wife wrote a plain, upright hand. Eli read it twice, and the second time he read it standing very still. "What is it?" Sella said. It was not a question. She had come up from the wash and was watching his face the way she'd watched the cough. "The agents filed papers," Eli said. His voice came out flat and far away. "In the county seat, naming her a ward of the state, says she's got no lawful people and belongs in a placement." He folded the paper along its creases, slow, as if neatness could hold the thing back. "Mrs. Harlow says the marshal's seen it. Says he's a fair man, but paper's paper, and if it comes to him signed and legal, he'll have no choice but to act on it." The word ward sat in the yard between them, like a stone thrown through a window. Sella's hand had gone to the knife at her belt, not to draw it, only to hold something. "She has lawful people," she said, low and shaking. "She has me." "Not to them, she don't." He hated saying it. "To them you're—" He couldn't finish. To them she was not a citizen, not a mother, not anything the paper would count. To them Eli himself was a lone white man who'd come by an Apache child in a way that begged a question, and the smooth man in the good coat had learned exactly which strings to pull. Sella turned to him, and her decision was already made. He could see it burning. "Then we do not wait for their paper," she said. "There is a place I know high past the agent's reach where my people who are left have gone. 2 days' ride hard, I take her tonight. Among them she is safe. Among them no paper touches her. And I never see her again." The words were out before he weighed them. She stopped, something crossed her face. "That's what you're asking," he pressed on, quiet, "and I understand it. You'd keep her breathing and I won't stand against that. But you ride her up those mountains tonight and she's gone out of my life like a light snuffed, and hers." He shook his head. "She's had everything torn out from under her once already. You tear her off me now in the dark, running." "I would tear her off the whole world," Sella said fiercely, "to keep her out of that man's hands." "I know it." He stepped closer and did not touch her, though he wanted to. "I know it because I'd do the same. That's the trouble with us, same kind of stubborn about the same small girl." He drew a breath. "Give me a little time. There's law and there's law. Give me time to find the kind that holds a lawful way to make her ours that no agent can pry loose. If it fails, you take her up the mountain and I'll saddle the horse myself and not say a word against it. But don't run tonight. Runners get caught." For a long moment the only sound was the wind coming down off the ridge and Nolly in the yard. Whispering to the 2 carved horses, she'd set nose to nose in the dust. Then Sella let her hand fall from the knife. "A little time," she said. "You and I, we stand together for her until it does not serve her any more." She looked at him hard. "And when it does not, you keep your word." "When it don't," he said, "I keep my word. I've never yet broke one." She studied him a breath longer, and something in her eased, and she put out her hand the way she'd seen the townmen do, awkward, deliberate, meeting him halfway across everything that stood between their two worlds. He took it. Her grip was dry and strong and did not let go too soon. Over by the fence, the girl laughed at something only she could hear, and neither of them looked away, and above the far ridge the light was already going long and gold and running out. Chapter 6, The Papers. They came in the blue hour before noon, when the heat had not yet broken and the dust hung low over the wagon road. Caleb Wynne saw them from the corral, 3 riders and a buggy moving deliberate, the way men move when they believe the day already belongs to them. He set down the coil of new rope he had been splicing and stepped into the open where they could see his hands. "Nady," he said not loud, "inside, stay with your aunt." The girl had been sitting on the top rail, heels hooked under it, watching him work. She looked past him to the road, and he watched the knowledge go through her small body like cold water. She knew that buggy, knew the man who rode behind its bright lacquered wheels. She slid down and went, quick and low, and the door of the log house closed behind her. The agent stepped down from the buggy with the care of a man who did not want to soil his boots. Holly's was his name, and he wore a town suit the color of pond water and a watch chain that caught the light. Behind him rode 2 men Caleb did not know, hired guns by the hang of their belts, and beside them, sitting his horse like a man who wished he were elsewhere, was Marshal Dunphy. "Mr. Wynne," Holly smiled and drew a leather folder from under his arm. "I'd hoped we might settle this like reasonable men. I've brought the law with me, you'll notice, so there's no cause for anybody to do anything foolish." "Marshal," Caleb said, ignoring the rest of it. Dunphy touched his hat brim. He did not smile. "Caleb." "You'll want to say your piece from the saddle," Caleb said to Holly's. "You won't be here long enough to need a chair." The agent's smile did not waver. He opened the folder and turned it so the seal showed, red wax on cream paper, an official stamp. "The child known to reside here," he read, "an Apache female orphaned of no established parentage, is hereby declared a ward of the territory, to be removed to the care of the industrial school at Fort Grant for her instruction and betterment." He looked up. "It's signed and it's lawful. She goes east on the Thursday stage." "I'm here to take custody." The house door opened. Caleb did not turn, but he heard the aunt come out onto the step, and heard the change in the air when the 2 riders saw her, an Apache woman straight-backed, her hair loose and her hand resting easy at her side where no knife showed but one surely waited. Sanciare, the girl's mother's sister. She had ridden a year across half a territory believing every child of her canyon dead, found this one living, and Caleb had learned in the weeks since that she did not frighten. "You will not take her," Sansi said. Her English was slow and exact, each word set down like a stone. "She is my sister's daughter. She is the last of my blood. She belongs to her people." Hollis regarded her with something close to pleasure, the look of a man who has been handed the argument he wanted. "And there," he said gently, "is precisely the difficulty." He closed the folder. "You'll forgive me for speaking plain, since plain is what the occasion needs. This man," he tipped his chin at Caleb, "is a white man living alone, no wife, no kin, who came by an Indian child under circumstances no court has examined. That is not guardianship. That is a man keeping what he found." He turned to Sansi, and his voice grew softer still, which was worse. "And you, madam, whatever your blood, are not a citizen of these United States. You cannot hold property. You cannot sign a contract. You cannot stand before any court in this territory and be heard. In the eyes of the law, you have no more claim to that child than the wind does." For a long moment no one spoke. A fly droned near the water trough. Caleb watched the words land on Sansi, not as a surprise, for surely she had lived her whole life inside that cruelty, but as a wound reopened, the old knowledge that the world had made a rule where her love did not count. "My word counts," Caleb said. Hollis turned back to him, patient. "Your word." "I found her half dead in a wash with the whole world burned down around her. I fed her and I housed her and I taught her letters, and she sleeps under my roof, and no paper you carry changes what I told her, which is that nothing else in this life gets to take her." He had not raised his voice. He never did. "That's my word. On my land, it's the only law that's ever mattered." "Admirable," Hollis said it the way another man might say foolish. "But this is not your land's law we're discussing. It is the territory's." Caleb looked at the marshal. "Done, is that how it is?" Dunphy shifted in his saddle. He was a fair man, Caleb had known that for years, and a fair man cornered by paper he did not write was a hard thing to watch. "The seal's real, Caleb," he said finally low. I checked it myself before I'd ride out here. I don't like it. I like him less. A flick of his eyes at Holly's. But I took an oath and the paper says what it says. I can give you time. I can't tell you it isn't so. How much time? Thursday, Dunphy's jaw worked. You've got till the stage. If you can show me lawful standing before then, real standing, something a judge would honor, I'll tear this up and let him sue me for it. But it has to be law, Caleb, not your word, not her blood, something written that holds. He let out a breath. That's the best I can do, and it's more than my badge should let me. The door opened wider and Nady came out. Caleb heard the small feet and turned, and there she was on the step, the carved wooden horse clutched to her chest, her eyes going from the men to him and back. She had understood enough. She always understood more than a child her age had any right to. She came down the steps and crossed the yard, and she did not run to one of them. She stopped between Caleb and Sansi, took a fistful of Caleb's coat in one hand and reached the other up to her aunt, and stood anchored to them both, small and shaking and refusing to choose, as if by holding them she could hold them all together against the day. Something moved in the marshal's face, and he looked away toward the mesas. Thursday, Holly said, and there was satisfaction in it. He climbed back into his buggy and gathered the reins. Marshal, if you're finished being sentimental. The two riders wheeled their horses. Dunphy sat a moment longer, his eyes on Caleb, and then he too turned and rode, and the dust rose and drifted, and the yard was quiet again but for the child's breathing. Caleb crouched and gathered her in, and over her head he met Sansi's eyes, and there was nothing to say that the child should hear. Holly's came back alone at dusk. Caleb saw the buggy top the rise against a sky gone the color of a bruise, and he went out and stood in the gate so Holly's could not pass, and the agent halted and did not get down. I sent the marshal on ahead, Holly said pleasantly. This next part is better done without him. It's a business matter, Mr. Wynne, and business is a thing between two men. Say it. $200. Holly's let the number sit. In gold tonight, and no one ever asks how a white rancher came into the company of an Apache child in the season of a raid with a standing bounty on its survivors. I take the girl off your hands quiet, and you go on richer and a good deal safer than you stand now. He smiled. I place a great many children, Mr. Wynne. It is remunerative work. The schools pay by the head, the territory pays a fee, and there are men back east who pay handsomely for a strong Indian girl to keep a house. Everyone is served. You could be served too. Caleb was very still. The last of the light was going out of the sky, and it took him a moment to trust his voice. You sell them, he said. I place them. You take them off the ash of their homes and sell them by the head, and dress it in a seal so the marshal rides out to hold your coat. He heard the flatness in his own words, the way a voice goes when anger has passed heat into something colder. Get off my land. Mr. Wynne. You've got till I count to 3, and then I stop being a man you can bribe. He did not reach for the rifle by the gatepost. He did not need to. 1. Holly's looked at his face and found nothing there to bargain with, and he pulled his horse around hard and drove the buggy back down the rise into the dark, the wheels rattling, and did not look back. Sansi was waiting in the yard when he came in. She had a blanket rolled and tied, and the mare he'd given the girl to ride was saddled at the rail, and Nady stood beside it wrapped in her coat, half asleep on her feet, and Caleb understood at once. No, he said. We go tonight. Sansi's voice was low and fierce. To the mountains, to my people, there the paper means nothing. There the bounty man cannot reach. I have watched the white law take from us my whole life, and it has never once given back. I will not stand and wait for Thursday to hand her to that man. She lifted her chin. I am grateful to you. You saved her, but I will not lose her a second time to trust in your law. It isn't my law. He came close enough to speak soft. God knows it isn't. It never was mine either. He looked at the girl swaying against the mare, then back at the woman. But if you take her into those mountains tonight, she's running the rest of her days. Every town, every road, every white face something to hide from. That man out there doesn't stop. His kind never stops. He drew a breath. Give me till Thursday. There's a way through this that leaves her free to stand in the sun. I don't have all of it yet, but I'll find it. I swear it to you the same as I swore it to her. For a long moment Sansi did not move. The wind came off the desert and turned cold, the way it does the instant the light is gone, and it lifted her hair and the fringe of her blanket. Why, she said at last, and it was not a challenge but a true question. She is not your blood, this is not your fight. She put her hand in mine at that gate, he said. The first night, that made it mine. Something in the woman's face gave way, not all of it, but a first stone loosed from a long-built wall. She looked at the saddled mare, and at the child, and then she bent and lifted Nadie up and carried her back toward the house, and at the door she stopped. Till Thursday, she said, no longer. Caleb unsaddled the mare in the dark. When he came in, the fire was low and the girl was asleep in the loft, and Sansi sat by the hearth with the two carved horses in her hands, turning them, the one from the canyon and the one he had made to match it. He sat down across from her, and for the first time neither looked away and neither spoke, and the fire ticked down while the wind worked at the door, two people with their backs to the same wall, learning that it was at least the same wall. Chapter 7, What the Law Won't Give. They rode into town 3 abreast, which was itself a kind of statement, and Cade knew it. He had thought about it half the night, lying in the loft cold with the girl breathing soft between him and the wall, and Lozin wrapped in her blanket by the banked stove below. He had thought that a man could keep to his own land, and his own quiet for only so long before the world came looking with paper in its hands, and that when it did, a wise man went out to meet it on ground of his own choosing rather than wait for it at his gate. So at first light he had saddled the mare and the tall roan, and Lozin had taken the paint she had ridden a year on, and Sansi had climbed up in front of Cade with the wooden horse fisted tight, and they had come down out of the hills together. "You are certain of this?" Lozin asked low, as the roofs of the town rose ahead. She had learned enough of his English through the season, and he enough of her, that they met somewhere in the middle and made themselves understood. "No," Cade said, "but Standen still hasn't served us. The agent's got law or the shape of it. I mean to find some law of my own to set against him." "Law," she said the word the way a person handled a snake, at arm's length watching the head. "In my nation there is law older than his papers." "But we are not in my nation." "No," he agreed. "We're in his, so we'll speak his tongue at him and see does it choke him any." That won the ghost of a smile from her, gone before it settled. They went first to the store. The bell over the door rang and Mrs. Bell herself came around the counter, wiping flour from her hands, and when she saw the girl her whole face gentled the way it always did. "Well, there's my customer," she said. "Come to spend that gentleman's money again, have you?" Sansi ducked her chin and half hid against Cade's leg, but she was smiling, and Mrs. Bell saw it and let out a breath. "She's put on flesh. She's got color. Anyone with eyes can see she's cared for." "That's what I've come to ask you," Cade said. "If it came to it, if a man in a suit stood up and said this child's neglected, ill-used, better off shipped east, would you say what your eyes see? Out loud before the marshal, before a judge if it came to that." Mrs. Bell set down her cloth. She looked at Lozin a long moment, taking in the travel-worn strength of her, and then she looked back at Cade, and there was no flinch in her at all. "I've sold you calico and thread and told my husband to hush his fool mouth about it," she said. "I've watched you learn to braid a child's hair from watchin' me do it once. I'll say what I've seen to any man breathing, and God can settle the rest. You tell me where to stand, and I'll stand there." "Thank you," Cade said, and meant it down to the boots. The marshal was another matter, and they both knew it walking to his office. Holly's was a fair man boxed in by a bad law, and a fair man in a box was a hard thing to move. He heard them out with his hat pushed back and his hands flat on the desk, and when Cade had finished, he was quiet a while. "I'll tell you straight because you've dealt straight with me," Holly said. "As you sit there, a widower livin' alone, and a woman the government don't even count a citizen, you've got no more legal hold on that child than I've got on the weather. The agent knows it. That's why he smiles so much." "Then tell me what does have hold," Cade said. Holly's turned a pencil end over end. "A household," he said slowly. "A standing household, man and wife, a roof, land in the man's name, a livelihood. The courts don't like talkin', a child out of a home that looks like a home. Circuit judge comes through in a month. A married couple with means and witnesses could file to be made her guardians, and it'd hold better than anything you've got now." He looked up. "It ain't justice, it's just the crack in the wall, but it's a crack." The word married sat in the little room, and none of the three of them looked at another. "That's a thing to think on," Cade said finally, and stood and put his hat on. "We're obliged, Marshal." "Cade," Holly stopped him at the door. "Whatever you decide, decide it quick. That agent's not a patient man, and I don't think he means to wait for any judge." They did not speak of it in the town. They bought their flour and their coffee and a length of red cloth Sansi had reached for, and they rode out past the last corral, with the sun going long and gold across the flats before either of them said a word. It was Lozin who said it, of course. She was not a woman to leave a hard thing lying in the road. "He means for us to marry," she said, "the lawman." "He means it'd help the child," Cade said, watching the mare's ears. "It ain't the same thing." "No," she rode easy, straight-backed, her eyes on the far hills. "In my nation a woman is not given like a horse in a trade. She chooses. My sister chose. I have never chosen." A pause. "You would do this for the child. Because your word is a chain you have wrapped around her, and you do not break your chains." "That's part of it," Cade admitted. "And the other part?" He was quiet so long the horses walked 100 yards. The first stars had come out, thin and white over the black rim of the mountains, and the desert had gone that deep blue it went before full dark. "I've been alone a long while," he said at last. His voice came rough, unused to this. "Since my wife passed, I told myself alone suited me. Land and horses and no voice in the house but my own. I believed it, too." He drew a breath. "Then I found a starved little thing in a wash that wouldn't take my hand for a week. And then a woman come down off a ridge madder than a stepped-on rattler, certain I'd stole her blood." The corner of his mouth moved. "Somewhere in this season the two of you got to be the whole of what I'd hate to lose. That ain't paper talkin', Lozin. If I marry you, it'd be to keep the child safe, yes. But I'd not want it to be only that. I'd not want it to be a lie we tell a judge." Lozin did not answer at once. When he risked a look at her, her face was turned up to the stars, and in the last of the light he saw it was wet, and that she let it be, unashamed, the way she had let herself weep at the morning rite for her sister. "My sister used to say," she said, "that grief and love come from the same spring. That is why they taste so alike." She wiped her cheek with the flat of her hand once and was done. "I have carried grief a year across this country looking for a dead child who was not dead. I did not think there was room left in me for the other thing." She looked at him then, direct as a rifle. "There is room. I did not choose it, but it is there, and I do not run from what is true." "That's about the most either of us is like to say tonight," Cade managed. "Yes," and she almost laughed, and he almost did, and the two of them rode on with something settled, warm, and terrifying between them. The peace lasted until the trading post at the crossroads, where a freighter Cade knew by sight was watering his team, and hailed them. "Cade, heard your name today," the freighter spat. "Fella in town, cold-eyed, buffalo coat, rides a gray, been askin' the road to your place. Sayin' there's a bounty out of the raid last winter, and it's got a woman's name on it and a child's. Sayin' whoever run off the survivors is owed money. He's countin' your Apache part of that ledger, Cade. Thought you'd want the knowin'." Cade felt the girl go still against him where she'd been dozing, half catching the shape of it even in a tongue she didn't fully have yet. He put a hand over her small ones on the pommel. "When'd he ride out?" Cade asked. "Midday, maybe. Slow, though. Like a man in no hurry 'cause he's sure of the end." They thanked him and rode on, and now there was no ease left in the dark at all. "The agent," Lozin said, flat and certain. "He could not take her with his papers before the judge comes, so he has opened the gate and let a wolf through. If the man kills me and takes the child for the reward, the agent's problem walks off on its own legs, and he keeps his clean hands." "That's about the size of it," Cade said. His voice had gone quiet and level, the way it went when he'd stopped being afraid and started being dangerous. "He wants it to look like the frontier just being the frontier." Lozin was silent a moment, and when she spoke again, it was of another thing entirely, and he understood after that she was reaching for something to set against the dread. "There is a thing I have not told you," she said, "about how a bond is made among my people. There is no paper, there is no man in a suit. When a man and a woman are joined, it is spoken before the kin, the mother's people, the elders, all who are left. What is said before them with witnesses in the sight of the mountains, that is as binding as any of your marshal's ink, stronger. Ink can burn." She looked over at him. "I say this so you know, whatever the judge does or does not give us, there is another way that is mine to give. If your people will not make us a family, mine can. What is left of mine?" "I'd count that no small thing," Cade said low. "I'd count it more'n the ink, truth be told." "Then remember it," she said, "when the hard part comes." They came up the last rise to the ranch in full dark, the house a black shape against the stars, no lamp lit because they'd left before dawn. Cade felt it before he saw it, some wrongness in the yard, the horses in the corral bunched and blowing at the far rail. He drew rein and swung the girl down behind him in one motion, and put her small hand into Lozen's. Then he stepped the roan forward and struck a match low against his palm. In the flare of it, printed clear in the soft dust of his own yard, were boot tracks. Fresh, more than one man's, come up to the door and gone around the back, and stood a while by the corral gate the way a man stands when he is measuring a place he means to come back to. The match burned down to his fingers. He shook it out. "He's already been," Cade said. Behind him, in the dark, he heard Lozen draw the child close, and heard the small, dry knock of the wooden horse against the pommel as Sansi held it to her chest. And above them all the desert stars burned on, beautiful and cold and no help at all. Chapter 8, The Taking. The fence was cut clean. Eli found the break at the far pasture where the wire crossed the dry creek. 3 strands snipped and coiled back on themselves so the cattle could push through into the brush. 20 head had already scattered up the draw, bawling in the heat, and he sat the sorrel a long moment looking at the bright ends of that wire where the pliers had bitten. Clean, no steer did that, no storm did that. Cold went through him then, colder than the morning had any right to make him, because a man does not cut a fence to steal cattle he means to leave in the brush. A man cuts a fence to pull the rancher off his own dooryard. "God Almighty," Eli said, and hauled the sorrel around. He had left them not 2 hours gone, Nair at the wash trough scrubbing a shirt Nady underfoot with a carved wooden horse, the 2 of them speaking their soft tangle of Apache and his rough English, laughing at something he had not understood and had not needed to. He had ridden out easy. He would remember that later, the easiness, and hate himself for it. He put the spurs to the sorrel and rode. Half a mile from the house, he heard the first shot. It came flat across the flat, a small dry crack, and then a second, and then a woman's voice lifted in a sound that was not fear but fury. A war cry old as the mountains, meant to make men afraid, and Eli laid himself along the horse's neck and rode the way he had not ridden in years, the way that breaks an animal's wind and does not care. He came over the last rise into his own yard and into ruin. There were 4 horses he did not know, and men afoot among them, and dust hanging gold and terrible in the low sun. The wash trough was overturned. And on the ground by the porch step was Naya, on one knee, a knife in her fist and blood down the whole left side of her, black already in the light, and she was still trying to rise, still trying to get between the men and the thing they carried. They carried Nady. The child was over a rider's saddlebow like a sack of grain, small legs kicking, small fists beating at the man's arm, and her voice came thin and high across the yard. A word Eli knew, the father word she had given him in the winter, screamed now over and over into the dust. Nady, Eli's colt was in his hand. He did not remember drawing it. The rider with the child kicked his horse and was gone up the north track before Eli could clear his own animal's head, and a second man swung up and turned to cover the going, and it was that man Eli fired on. He missed clean, the sorrel was still plunging, and the ball buried itself in the porch post a foot from Naya's head. Then the other 3 were mounted and riding, spread out, one of them turning in the saddle to loose a shot that whined past Eli's ear like a hornet, and Eli fired again and saw a horse stumble and recover, and then they were into the brush along the creek and swallowed, and the drum of them fading, north, always north, and the child's voice going with them. He could follow and lose Naya. He could stay and lose the child. It was the hardest reckoning of his life, and it took him no time at all, because Naya had fallen forward onto her hands in the dirt and was not getting up again, and a dead woman could not tell him where they had taken the girl. He was off the sorrel and on his knees beside her. "Easy, easy now, I've got you." His hands were already at the wound, tearing her sleeve back. A bullet had gone through the meat of her upper arm and out, and there was a longer, worse cut low on her side where a blade had opened her when she closed with them. She had closed with them. She had put her body between grown armed men and the child and made them cut her to take her, and even now her eyes came open and found his, and the first thing in them was not pain. "They have her," Naya said. Her voice was a ruin. "Eli, they have her." "I know it. Go, leave me, go after." "Hush," he got an arm under her. "I'll not bring her home to no aunt lying dead in the yard. Now hold on to me." He carried her inside. He was a big man and she was not small, and neither of those things weighed anything against the terror in him, and he laid her on the bed that had been his and his dead wife's and now was hers, and he built up the fire and put water to boil and cut her clothes away with hands that would not shake because he would not let them. In the dust of the yard, forgotten, lay the little wooden horse. He worked on her a long time as the light went. The arm was clean and he wrapped it tight. The side was the danger, deep and bleeding sullen, and he packed it and bound it and sat her forward against him to wind the cloth around. And she gripped a fistful of his shirt and pressed her face to his shoulder and made no sound at all, which was worse than screaming. "Who were they?" Eli said low when it was done, and she lay back gray and spent. "White men one I have seen in the town." Her breath came shallow. "Watching, always watching, the tall one with the pale eyes." "The bounty man," Eli's jaw set, "Prewitt's dog." "They spoke a name, Prewitt." She said it like something spat out. "They said the morning train. They said they must have her to the morning train." Eli went very still. Night came on. He would not leave her, and he could not sit still, so he did both at once, moving between the bed and the window, watching the black yard, listening to the desert, coming back to lay his hand on her forehead where the fever was already climbing. Twice he took up his rifle and stood at the door with the whole night wanting to swallow him, and twice he came back, because a man alone in the dark could ride 100 wrong directions and never find her, and morning was coming, and morning was where they would be. Toward the middle of the night, the fever took her voice loose from her. "I buried my sister," Naya said to the ceiling, to no one to him. "I buried all of them. I dug in that canyon with my hands, and I counted the dead, and I said her name over each small one because I could not tell which. I told myself the girl was among them. It was easier. Do you understand me? It was easier to believe her dead than lost. Naya." And then she was alive. A sound came out of her that was half a laugh and half a thing with no name. "She was alive, and she was here braided all wrong, eating your burned bread, calling a white man father, and I hated you for it. I wanted to hate you for it." Her hand came across the blanket, blind, searching, and he took it, and she held on. "I cannot lose her twice. Do you hear me, Eli? I have buried everyone. I will not bury her." "And the words cracked, and she pushed through them anyway, "I will not lose you either. There, I have said it. Burn me for it in the morning if you like." He sat down slow on the edge of the bed and did not let go of her hand. "You'll lose neither," he said. "That's my word, and you'll come to learn a thing about my word. I have watched your word all season." She turned her head and looked at him, and the fever was in her eyes, but so was the whole of her. "It is the only wall in this country that has not fallen down." He was still holding her hand when the hoofbeats came. One horse walking unhurried, and a voice from the dark calling the house by name, Rourke. "Eli Rourke, don't you shoot, it's Co." And Eli was at the door with the rifle up regardless until the marshal rode into the fireglow with both hands wide of his guns, and his face, the face of a man who has seen something that sickened him. "I heard there was shooting out this way." Co looked at the trampled yard, the overturned trough, the dark stain on the step. He took off his hat. "How bad?" "She's cut and shot, and she's alive." Eli lowered the rifle. "They took the girl, Marshal, Prewitt's men and that bounty rider, you know this." "I know it now." Co's voice was flat with anger. "I know more than that. I've been asking the wrong questions of the right man for a week, and this evening I got answers." He stepped down. "That bounty on the canyon survivors, it's paper, Rourke. It's a fraud. Prewitt wrote it up himself through a friend at the agency and set that rider on it so's he'd have a gun to do what the law wouldn't. There is no reward. There is no crime. There's just a man who makes his money placing Indian children where they can't be got back and gets paid twice, once by the state and once by whoever buys the labor at the other end." "Where is she?" "Held at the depot, locked room back of the station house." Co turned the hat in his hands. "They mean to put her on the 6 o'clock east, and once she's over the county line and into an institution she is gone, Rourke. Gone into paper so deep no man alive digs her out." Behind them from the bed, Naya said, "Then we go to the depot." Both men turned. She had got herself up onto one elbow, white as bone, the bandage already darkening at her side, her eyes burning. "You'll not stand," Eli said. "I stood in front of 4 men today with a knife." She swung her feet to the floor and set her jaw against what it cost her. "I will stand at that depot. Do not tell me to wait in a bed while they carry her off. I waited a year believing her dead. I am done waiting." Eli looked at her a long moment. Then he crossed and knelt and picked up her moccasins and put them in her hands, which was his answer, and she took a breath that shook and gripped his shoulder to rise. He went out into the yard alone for a minute while she readied. The wooden horse lay in the dust where it had fallen, He picked it up and brushed it clean with his thumb. The little carved thing he had made to match the one she clutched the day he found her in the wash. And he stood in the dark with it in his big hand and felt the whole of the season rise up in him. The burned bread, the botched braids, the small hand slipping into his at the gate. The word he still did not fully know the meaning of and had answered to anyway. "I'm coming, girl," he said to the horse to the north to the coming morning. "You hold on." He put it in his breast pocket over his heart and went back in. They rode before first light, the marshal, and the wounded woman who would not be left, and the quiet man who had at last stopped keeping his vow a secret even from himself. To bring the child home, and to stand as husband and father over both of them, law or no law, for as long as there was breath in him to stand at all. The east was going gray when they cleared the gate. None of the three looked back. Chapter 9, The Claim. The way station at Dry Fork sat gray in the first light. A low adobe box beside the rails where the morning stage watered its team before the long haul east. Eli reined the roan at the top of the rise and looked down at it the way a man looks at a wound he means to close. The marshal came up quiet beside him, and behind them both, refusing every plea to stay abed, rode Kaya, her wounded shoulder bound tight beneath her blanket, her jaw set against the pain of it. "They're inside," the marshal said. "Agent's men on the porch, 4, maybe 5, and the tall one." "The bounty man," Eli said. "That one," the marshal shifted his weight in the saddle. "Eli, I got no papers that say I can do this, only what I've come to believe is right." "Then that'll have to be enough." They rode down slow in the open, so no man could say they came sneaking. On the porch the hired men straightened, hands drifting toward their belts, and in the doorway stood the agent in his clean town coat, a folded sheaf of papers in his hand like a shield. "That's far enough," the agent called, smiling the way he always smiled. "You've no business here, rancher. The child is a ward of the territory, lawfully placed. The stage carries her east at 7, and there's nothing you can do that won't see you hanged." Eli stepped down, let the reins drop, and walked to the foot of the porch steps and stopped, and he did not reach for his pistol. "I've not come to shoot anybody," he said. "I've come for my girl." "Your girl?" The agent's smile widened. "You have no claim, you are a lone man of no relation, and that woman," he tipped his chin at Kaya, "is a non-citizen Indian with no standing before any court in this land. Between you there is not one lawful thread. I've read the statutes, sir. I've made my living reading them." "You've made your living selling children," Kaya said. Her voice came low and clear across the yard, and it did not shake. The agent's eyes flicked to her, and something behind the smile went tight. That was when the marshal came down off his horse. He came slow, coat swept back so every man on the porch could see the star, and mounted the steps and stood there among the hired guns as if he'd been invited. "I want the men that took wages off this fella to hear me plain," the marshal said, "because come the reckoning it'll matter which side of the porch you stood on. The bounty this man's been waving, the reward on the folk out of that canyon, I wired the territorial office 2 nights running. There is no bounty. There never was." He drew it up himself on a form he stole to make honest men do his hauling. He turned his head. "That's fraud, boys, a federal charge. You want to hang for his wages." A silence went through the porch like wind through dry grass. "He's lying," the agent said, but the smoothness had cracked and the men heard it. "He'd say anything." "I'd say the truth," the marshal said. "You take money from the placement house back east, so much ahead for every Indian child you put on that train. I've got Mrs. Hale ready to swear to what you asked her, and a circuit judge 2 days out who'll want your books." He looked round at the hired men. You, step off, you're done here." One man stepped off the porch, then another. They did not look at the agent as they went. They looked at their boots and at the star, and they went to their horses and did not stop going. That left the tall one. The bounty man had not moved through any of it. He stood at the far end of the porch, coat open and hand loose, and looked at Eli the way a butcher looks at a steer, weighing where the work would be. When he spoke, his voice was flat as slate. "Paper or no paper," he said, "I put my hand to a job, I mean to finish it." "There's no money in it," Eli said. "You heard the man." "It ain't the money now." The bounty man's mouth moved, not quite a smile. "It's that you all keep standing where I told you not to." He was fast. Eli had known men who bragged and men who were quiet, and the quiet ones were the ones to fear. But Eli had spent a year learning that a man finds in himself, at the last, exactly as much as he loves. And there was a child behind that adobe wall who had once slipped her hand into his at a gate and undone him for good. The bounty man's hand dropped and Eli's dropped with it, and only one shot cracked across the yard, and it was not the bounty man's. He rocked back against the post with a look of mild surprise and slid down it to sit in the dust with his hat over one eye and was still. Eli was already turning to the door. "The agent," the marshal said sharply. But the agent had dropped his papers and was scrabbling for a little pocket gun, and the marshal took him by the wrist and bent it back until the derringer fell and the man folded to his knees on his own scattered statutes. "You are under arrest," the marshal said, snapping the irons on him, "for fraud against the United States, for the theft of a child, and for anything else the judge can think to hang on you. You wanted paper. You'll get all the paper you can eat." Eli put his shoulder to the door and went in. The room was dim and smelled of coffee and coal oil, and there in the corner, tied by one wrist to a chair too big for her, sat Nady. She saw him and made a sound he would carry to his grave. Not a word, just his name torn out of her hole. He crossed the floor and had the rope off her wrist before he rightly knew he'd drawn his knife. And then she was up out of the chair and around his neck, and he stood there with the child pressed against him and his hand cupped over the back of her head. And for a moment he could not have spoken had the roof come down. "I've got you," he managed. "Nobody's taking you anyplace." Behind him, Kaya came through the door, and Nady twisted around and reached. And Kaya went to her knees with a cry and gathered the child against the good side of her. And the three of them made one shape in the gray light, while outside the sky went from ash to rose. It was Nady who remembered. She pulled back, patting at Eli's pockets, her face gone urgent, and he understood, and he reached into his coat and brought out the little carved horse, the one he had picked up out of the trampled dust of his own yard 2 nights past, and had not let out of his hand since, and he closed her fingers over it. "There," he said, "he came home too." She held it to her chest with both hands and finally wept, the way a child weeps when the danger is over and not before. They came out into full morning to find the yard filling with riders. Eli's hand went to his belt before he saw them true. They came down off the north track without hurry, a dozen and more blanketed against the chill, their eyes taking in everything: the fallen man, the ironed one, the star, the white rancher with an Apache child in his arms. Kaya straightened, her breath catching, and then she called out in her own tongue, and one of the riders, an old man, straight-backed, silver in his hair, lifted his hand. "My mother's brother," she said low. "The word reached the mountains, they came for her. For all of us." The old man dismounted, and Nady wriggled down out of Eli's arms and ran to him and was lifted up and passed from hand to hand among her people, each one touching her face as if to be sure of her, some of them weeping openly, for they had buried this child in their hearts a year ago, and here she stood. Eli stood back with his hat in his hands, the way he had learned to do. But the old man came to him. He stood before Eli a long moment, then looked at Kaya, at the bound shoulder, at the thing in her face when she looked at the rancher, for old men see what young ones try to hide. He asked her something in their tongue, and she answered it low, and he nodded once and turned back to Eli and waited. Eli understood that he was being given the floor. That whatever a man had to say, this was the hour to say it. He was not a man of words, but he found he did not need many. "I'm no talker," he said, rougher than he meant. He looked at Kaya. "But I'll say it once plain in front of your people so it can't ever be unsaid." He took a step to her and lowered his voice, and yet it carried in the still yard the way the truest things do. "This one," he laid his hand light on Nady's dark head where the old man held her, "is mine to protect. Blood or no blood, paper or none, mine to keep all my days." He turned his eyes to Kaya and gentled them. "And you. I've had a cold house a long time, and you too filled it before I knew it was filling. I'm asking to stand as your husband. I'm claiming you and the girl both as my family that no man takes from me while I breathe." His throat worked. "That's my word." For a moment there was only the wind. Then Kaya took his rough hand in both of hers, careless of her hurt, and pressed it against her heart so he could feel it going. "I lost my sister," she said. "I will not lose her child a second time, and I will not lose you." Her voice dropped to the low place where vows live. "I answer you, I take you before them and before her." And she said it again in her own tongue, turned to her people, ringing and unafraid, so it would stand in both worlds at once. The old man lifted his voice then, and the others gathered close, and what they did in their own way and their own words. the elders speaking over the three of them and passing a hand of gray pollen from a pouch across their brows in blessing. First the man, then the woman, then the child between them. Eli did not know the words. He stood inside them and let them fall on him like a first rain, and he understood that this was a thing no court could grant and no agent could sell, that these people, who owed him nothing and had every cause for mistrust, were giving him the one gift that mattered. They were making him belong. When it was done, the marshal cleared his throat and settled his hat. Well, a married household with standing blood kin to witness, and me to swear to every word before the judge. He almost smiled. I'd like to see the paper that beats that. Your guardianship'll hold, Eli. I'll see to it myself. They rode home in the last of the light, the three of them and Kaya's people trailing after, the mountains going purple behind them. Nady rode before Eli with the wooden horse fast in her fist, half asleep against his chest, and Kaya rode at his stirrup close enough to touch, and did. At the gate, the same gate where a starved child had once slipped her hand into his, Eli reined up and looked at his house with its one lit window, and at the woman beside him, and at the sleeping girl, and he bent his head and said it once more, only for the two of them, barely a breath. Mine to protect, always. Chapter 10, Belonging. Spring came up the canyon that year the way water comes to a dry wash, slow, then all at once and everywhere. The cottonwoods along the creek put out leaves the color of new coins, and the high desert that had been iron gray all winter went soft with grama grass, and the small stubborn blooms that had no business being so bright. Eli Calder stood at the corral rail in the early light and watched the girl ride, and he thought a man could live a long time and never see anything finer. She sat the spotted pony he had traded 2 heifers for, back straight, heels down, the reins loose the way Kaya had taught her because the horse knew its work and did not need to be told. She had grown a hand taller over the winter. Her hair was braided in 2 clean plaits that lay flat and even down her back, not the lumpish, uneven ropes Eli had wrestled into being that first season, catching them in the wrong strands and swearing softly while she held still and forgave him. Kaya did them now, quick fingers moving before breakfast, and the girl did her own on the days Kaya let her. She rides better than you, Kaya said, coming to stand beside him with 2 tin cups of coffee. She rides better than anybody, Eli said and took the cup. You taught her. You gave her the horse. Kaya leaned on the rail. In the year since she had first sat that ridge above the house like a hawk deciding whether to strike, the hardness had gone out of the way she held herself around him. Not the fierceness, that was hers to keep, but the guard. She wore her hair loose this morning and a shirt of his rolled to the elbow, and she belonged against that rail as surely as the wood did. Turn her, Date, she called across the yard, and then the same in her own tongue, and the girl turned the pony neat as a stitch and grinned back at them, gap-toothed and unafraid. Date, it had taken Eli the better part of a week to say it right that first autumn, and she had rewarded him at last with her first smile, and he had felt like a man handed back something he had buried. Now she answered to it in 2 languages, and answered to asterisk daughter asterisk in a third that was neither of theirs, and belonged only to the 3 of them. Riders coming, Kaya said, before Eli's eye had even caught the dust. He looked 2 horses and a wagon coming easy up the road from town, and he knew the set of them before he could see the faces. Marshal, he said, and the wagon's Ada's. Kaya's mouth curved. She will have brought too much cloth again. She always brings too much cloth. Ada Sorrells, the storekeeper's wife, who had sold Eli calico and kept his counsel and testified before the circuit judge with her chin up and her voice steady that no child had ever been better cared for than the one under Eli Calder's roof, climbed down from the wagon with a basket over her arm, and a bolt of blue print she swore was for a summer dress and no argument about it. Behind her, the marshal, Tom Hendry, stepped down slower, favoring the leg that had never quite come right since the morning at the depot. He carried papers under his arm, and Eli's gut tightened out of old habit before he made himself let it go. There was nothing to fear in papers anymore. He had learned that, too. Don't look at me like that, Hendry said, catching the flinch. It's the guardianship, signed, sealed, filed, and stamped by a judge who read every word and shook my hand after. You're going to want to frame it. He held it out. Both your names on it, legal as sunrise. Eli took the paper. He did not unfold it right away. He stood holding it while the girl brought the pony over to the rail to show Ada, and Kaya answered something the marshal said, and the morning went on around him, and he thought about how long a road it had been to a single folded sheet that said what he had known in his bones since the day he'd found a half-starved child clutching a carved wooden horse in a dry wash, and sworn under his breath that nothing else in this world would take her. The agent, Kaya asked. She always asked. She would go on asking, Eli thought, until the man was dust and maybe after. Territorial prison, Hendry said. Fraud and worse than fraud. The bounty he cooked up on that raid, the whole thing was paper he wrote himself to move children where the money was. Judge unwound the lot of it. There's talk they'll go back through every placement he ever made and try to send those young ones home. He shook his head. Won't get them all, but it's more than got done before. Your Ada wrote letters to people I didn't know a storekeeper's wife could write letters to. I know a great many people, Ada said serenely, not turning from the pony. Most of them owe me money. The girl laughed at that. She understood most of everything now, the town's talk and Kaya's talk both, sliding between them the way the creek slid over stones, and the laugh set them all to it. And for a moment the yard was only the sound of people who liked each other well. They sat to a long dinner at midday, the table Eli had built for one and widened twice. Ada had brought a ham and dried apples. Kaya had made the flat bread her sister used to make, and Eli watched her not weep over it the way she once had, only press her hand flat to it once before she served. There had been a morning right in the fall, before the snow, when Kaya's people came down out of the mountains. He had stood back with his hat in his hands and honored it, understanding none of the words and all of the grief. And afterward an old man of her nation had looked at Eli a long time, and then spoken the blessing over the three of them that no white law could give and no white law could take. The bond made before her kin, binding as any paper and older than all of them. They were coming again, Kaya said, when the moon filled, her uncle and two families and the old man, to see how you keep her, she said, and to see how I keep you. And how's that? Eli said. Well enough, but her eyes were warm over the rim of the cup. The marshal and Ada left in the long gold of late afternoon, the wagon rattling down toward the town that had, this past winter, done a thing Eli had not expected of it. Not forgiveness. The town did not think it had anything to be forgiven for, and that argument would outlast Eli's life. But when the agent's racket came out into the light, something had turned. The men who had muttered *savage over the girl's head in the mercantile did not mutter it now, or not where Eli could hear, which for a hard country was nearly the same as an apology. The schoolteacher had sent word the child could come learn her letters if she liked. Prejudice was not gone. It waited at the gate the way coyotes waited at the edge of lamplight. But it waited at the gate, and the gate held, and inside it the family ate at one table. That evening Eli sat on the porch step and mended a bridle he had already mended, because his hands wanted work while the light went. Date sat below him on the packed earth with the two carved wooden horses, the one she had clutched in the wash, worn smooth as a river stone by a year of small fingers, and the twin he had whittled that first autumn so she would have a pair. They lived on the mantel most days, side by side, but she took them down to play when the mood was on her, and she was murmuring to them now in her mother's tongue, a game he did not need to understand. Ta, she said suddenly, which was the word that was theirs, and held up the older horse. This one is you, she held up the other. This one is Kaya. That's so, Eli set the bridle down. Where's you? She considered this with the great seriousness of a child of 7. Then she pressed both horses together in her two hands, so close the carved manets touched, and looked up at him. In the middle, she said in English, careful and proud, where you keep me. Something moved in Eli's chest that he had no word for in any language. He reached down and cupped the back of her braided head the way he had 10,000 times and said low, That's right, in the middle. Always. Kaya came out with a blanket and sat beside him on the step, and they watched the girl play until the light failed, and the first stars came hard and white over the ridge where a rider had once sat all day deciding whether to trust a lone white man with the last of her blood. The creek talked to itself. Somewhere off in the dark a horse stamped and settled. You are quiet, Kaya said. I'm always quiet. More than always. He turned the wedding band on his finger plain, hammered from a coin by a smith in town who had asked no questions and taken no extra pay. Thinking a man doesn't get a second one of these, he said. A whole life. I had one and lost it and made my peace with the losing, wasn't looking for another. He looked at her in the dark. Then 2 of you rode in and took the place over. We did not take it. Kaya's voice was grave, but her hand found his. You opened it. Later, when the fire had burned to coals, and the wooden horses stood again on the mantel with the firelight moving over them, Eli carried the girl up the loft ladder half asleep, and laid her in the bed he had built too small and lengthened once already. She stirred and caught his hand and said something in the drowsy tongue of nearly dreaming, and did not let go until sleep took her the rest of the way. He worked his fingers free and drew the blanket to her chin and stood a moment looking down. Then he crossed to where Kaya lay waiting in the low light, and he lay down beside her, and put his arm over the two of them the way he had once put his coat around a sleeping child in a jolting wagon, resolve hardening into something that would outlast him. "Mine to protect," he said, so quiet it was hardly said at all, the claim he had first whispered at a gate a year gone and spoken aloud before her people in the fall, and would go on saying as long as breath was in him. "Both of you, always." Kaya's hand came to rest over his heart. She said the words back to him in her own tongue, the ones that meant the same and more, and he had learned enough of it now to know. Outside, the high desert lay silver and enormous under the spring stars, and if a man had ridden the ridge at first light the next morning, he would have found 3 sets of tracks leading down out of the hills and home: a big horse, a woman's mare, and the small, quick prints of a spotted pony. All of them pointed the same way, toward the low house with smoke standing up straight from the chimney and a carved wooden horse waiting on the mantel for a small hand to take it down. The light came up gold over the ridge and ran down the canyon and found them there together, and the country that had emptied itself of a family one hard year gave one back whole.